Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Winston Churchill's grandson, the Conservative MP Sir Nicholas Soames, and I asked him how he remembered the original funeral.
It was an extraordinary experience. It was a rather overawing experience to start with. But as the parade actually got going, what was extraordinary was trying to focus in front, but all the time seeing these enormous crowds, many of whom were very deeply affected by saying goodbye to my grandfather.
Do you think it's a bit odd today to be commemorating a commemoration? Out of all the dates you could take in his life, why that one?
It was the end of an era. I mean, looking at the crowd as we marched past behind the coffin, almost every man wore a hat, a lot of men wore medals, a lot of women wore medals. You know, it was a wartime generation. And I think that he has become a kind of talisman for future generations. And I think it's rather amazing and wonderful that his spirit and the memory of his spirit is still so strong that the 50th anniversary of his death does fall as a major event.
Why do you think so many prime ministers and would-be prime ministers invoke him and quote him in their conference speeches? Is it appropriate?
It's not just prime ministers, it's President of the United States. I mean, President Obama in his speech in Westminster Hall quoted my grandfather about 5 or 6 times. President Bush always quoted him. I think it's because the words conveyed magnificence, leadership. They conveyed a sort of feeling of solidarity to the country. And I think people want to recreate that. And I think he was, you know, there aren't many other figures. There aren't many heroes in our British politics. And he was a hero, and people of all generations see him as that.
Do you think it's the way he's perceived during those war years that seals him, though? I mean, is he insulated, if you like, from everything that went before? You know, there was lots of controversial things before, lots of things he's been criticised for, from Gallipoli to India to all sorts of other things. I mean, do they basically get swept away in history?
I think it does. And as I say, you know, he served as a Member of Parliament for 63 years and 360 days, clearly in a very controversial life from time to time. Of course, he made some bad judgment calls. I think Gallipoli was clearly a great disaster, but I don't think it can all be laid at his door. Nevertheless, he took the can for it, and quite rightly, as he was First Lord of the Admiralty. But I think that, you know, at the end of the day, on the night, he was right. And I think it is true that the period of his leadership of this country through a very bad time enabled him to rise above all those past mistakes, and no one in his place would not have made mistakes, and set the kind of tone for what he was, which was to save this country from the most appalling fate.
So do you think he was a racist, but that was just a product of his upbringing or his time?
Yes, I think he was a child of his time, and we all are. You are, I am, we are all children of our time and our background. And you know, what is so extraordinary, I think, in his life, is that this is the young man who charged at the Battle of Omdurman in the last cavalry charge of the British Army, armed with a sword and a pistol, and in his later life as Prime Minister ushered in the nuclear weapon as a battlefield weapon and for civilian use, and saw the first man go into space in 1961.
How do you think he'd have fared today in modern politics?
Well, I think 2 things. First of all, he'd have dominated the House of Commons because words were his thing. He'd have done that very. He'd have frankly eaten them alive, in my view. But of course, he would not have been good at the television interview any more than I am, and he wouldn't have been good with spin, and he wouldn't have liked all that. And the reason you asked about, you know, people loved Churchill. Many people loved Churchill because he was completely authentic. You know, he liked a cigar, he liked a drink, he liked what my friends call a fag and a pint. You know, he did. He was an authentic human being. There was no side to him.